17 years have passed since Madeleine McCann disappeared, but do we know everything? What did the media leave out? Stay until the end to understand what was never fully explained. Imagine being Kate McCann on that May night in 2007. You are just meters away from your children, in a place that should be safe. Suddenly, the familiar silence turns into an inexplicable feeling of absence. Something is wrong. When you realize it, your life changes forever. But what happened after Madeleine's disappearance is not just about the chaos of that night, it's about the unanswered questions and the choices that were never explained. That night, Kate's mind was in constant tension. She and Jerry had left the children in the room, confident that everything was under control. After all, they were at a family resort, surrounded by friends and tranquility. With each passing minute, that feeling of security seemed to dissipate. When Kate returned to the room and found the bed empty, Madeleine's absence became an abyss, an absence that would never be filled. From then on, seconds turned into panic. Kate, with a mix of desperation and denial, called out her daughter's name, but all that came back was the echo of her own voice. To her, time seemed to stop, but the sequence of events that followed would be faster than anyone could have predicted. When the news spread through the resort, a feeling of unease took over everyone. One of the couple's friends, David Payne, tried to calm everyone down. Meanwhile, Jerry, visibly shaken, insisted on alerting the authorities. The initial hours are crucial in any disappearance case, but at that moment, a series of mistakes began to happen. The resort manager was slow to contact the local authorities. Witnesses who could have had valuable information were sidelined, while the authorities, upon arrival, did not cordon off the area. The emotional tension was evident, but there was an even more concerning detail. No one seemed to know where to start. Inconsistencies began to emerge in the first hours. There were conflicting reports about a figure seen carrying a child, but no thorough investigation was conducted at that time. Additionally, the room where Madeleine disappeared became a mess of footprints, compromising any potential evidence. And here comes the big question. How did what happened in the first moments after the disappearance influence everything that came afterward? Were the clues that could have changed the course of the case discarded or neglected? It's hard not to wonder, if the initial mistakes hadn't happened, would we be telling a different story? The Madeleine McCann case has spanned almost 2 decades, but some questions remain as troubling as on the night of her disappearance. What happened on that May night in 2007 is a puzzle whose pieces seem never to fit together completely. And this is not only because of the complexity of the case, but also because of the crucial decisions that were made or left aside when everything happened. To understand the impact of the initial mistakes, we need to go back to that fateful moment. Madeleine McCann, a child of only 3 years old, disappeared from her room at the Ocean Club Resort in Portugal. Her mother, Kate McCann, upon returning from dinner with friends, found Madeleine's bed empty. Desperation took over Kate, who immediately ran to the restaurant shouting, "She's been taken!" These words echoed throughout the resort, but instead of a coordinated and precise response, chaos began to take over. The family's friends, known as Tapas 7, ran out, each in a different direction, searching for Madeleine. This decision, although understandable in a moment of desperation, ended up hindering the investigations from the start. Each of them trampled critical areas that could have contained clues or evidence. This chaotic scenario turned what should have been a meticulous search into a mess that would compromise future investigative efforts. Meanwhile, the local police were slow to arrive, a failure that, to this day, generates intense debates. Why wasn't the call about a missing child treated with the necessary urgency? Some experts suggest that the authorities initially thought it was just a misunderstanding. Perhaps Madeleine had gone out alone and would soon be found. But as we know now, that hypothesis was far from the truth. One of the most neglected pieces of information, but which should have changed the course of that night, came from the babysitter who worked at the resort. Days before the disappearance, she reported to her superiors that the security at the location was lacking. The room doors didn't have proper locks, and anyone could access the facilities. If these warnings had been taken seriously, would Madeleine have been safe that night? It's a question that remains unanswered but carries a bitter dose. That was just the first of a series of mistakes that would lead to an investigation full of gaps. When the police finally arrived, one of the first actions should have been to isolate the room where Madeleine was sleeping. But this didn't happen. On the contrary, friends, staff, and even curious onlookers entered the location, leaving fingerprints, moving objects, and irreparably altering the environment. For criminology experts, this was a basic failure. Any DNA sample that could have been collected was compromised. This includes traces of who entered or left the room, footprints, and even possible signs of struggle. But that night, everything was lost amidst the chaos and lack of protocol. And that wasn't the only mistake. During the initial search, sniffer dogs that could have helped locate Madeleine quickly were not called. Instead, the searches were conducted in an unorganized manner, with volunteers and police officers walking randomly around the resort and its surroundings. The decision not to seal off the area immediately, coupled with the delay in involving specialized teams, is seen by many as one of the most critical errors in the entire case. Among the people who were at the resort that night, one witness in particular had information that could have made all the difference. Jane Tanner, a friend of the McCanns, reported seeing a man carrying a child in his arms around 9:15 p.m. She described the man as wearing light pants and a dark jacket, while the child, whom she believed to be Madeleine, was wrapped in a blanket. But for some reason, Jane's testimony was not treated with the seriousness it deserved. The local police only began to pay attention to this information days later, when it was already too late. Additionally, Jane stated that at the moment she saw the man, 2 police officers were near the location, but didn't notice anything suspicious. This detail raises an important question. Could the man have been intercepted if the information had been shared immediately? Years later, an independent investigation revealed that the man described by Jane Tanner could have been someone carrying his own child. But again, this possibility was explored too late, when time and circumstances had already eroded any chance of concrete verification. Another detail that remains perplexing to this day is the absence of functioning security cameras that night. In a resort that hosted tourists from all over the world, there were no recorded images to show who entered or exited. The justification? The cameras were turned off for maintenance reasons. This technological failure was a devastating blow to the investigations. Without images, the authorities were forced to rely entirely on witness statements, which were often contradictory or inaccurate. And speaking of contradictory testimonies, another point that compromised the investigation was the lack of consistency in the reports from the McCann's friends. Although everyone was dining together at the resort's restaurant, their versions of the timings and who checked on the children varied considerably. These contradictions gave rise to a series of theories, many of them accusing the group itself of hiding something. This atmosphere of distrust further hindered the search for Madeleine, diverting the investigation's focus to theories that may never be confirmed. Now, looking at all this, it's impossible not to wonder, what if things had been done differently? What if the room had been isolated from the start? What if Jane Tanner's report had been treated with more urgency? These what-ifs not only make the case more frustrating, but also show how seemingly small decisions can have a gigantic impact. What happened that night was, for the most part, a succession of mistakes that turned a disappearance into a mystery that haunts the world to this day. From the beginning, the Madeleine McCann case has been a true labyrinth of doubts, contradictions, and secrets. Every time it seems there is an answer, new layers emerge that complicate the investigation even more. And just when everything seems to stabilize into a linear narrative, something unexpected appears. One such twist occurred when, months after the disappearance, an almost forgotten detail was revisited. It wasn't physical evidence or an official testimony, but a discreet, almost banal account that only gained relevance when investigated thoroughly. On the night Madeleine disappeared, a British tourist staying at a nearby resort mentioned seeing something peculiar while walking along the beach at dusk. He reported observing a man standing near a small boat, apparently looking towards the Ocean Club. At the time, this account wasn't taken very seriously by the Portuguese authorities, who were focused on investigating the McCann's closest circle. However, years later, when independent investigations began to revisit the case files, another one made around the same time, this time by a local fisherman. Both mentioned an individual with dark hair, of average height, wearing clothes that seemed disheveled, as if he was nervous or in a hurry. The connection between these two accounts raised an unsettling question. Who was this man? And why was he there, alone, watching the location as if he was waiting for something? The detail about the boat, initially considered irrelevant, ended up becoming a central clue when investigators realized that no official record of that boat was made at the local marina that week. This was, at the very least, unusual. Even small fishing or tourist boats were usually registered for safety and control reasons. The idea that someone could have used the boat to take Madeleine out of the country began to take shape. And if that were true, how did the local authorities not consider this possibility earlier? What makes this theory even more disturbing is that over the following months after the disappearance, several reports of people spotting a blonde child in coastal cities across Europe began to emerge. Were these sightings an echo of Madeleine's passage, or simply coincidences reinforced by the massive media attention? Another point that emerged as a twist was the analysis of the psychological profile of possible suspects who could have been involved in the disappearance. Criminal behavior specialists reviewed the original reports and realized that a key suspect mentioned in the early days of the case was practically dismissed without his connection being thoroughly investigated. This man, who had been seen near the Ocean Club in the days before the disappearance, had a history of suspicious behavior in other countries. Reports of surveillance, attempts to approach children, and even previous cases that did not result in convictions created a worrying pattern. Why was he dismissed? Some say it was due to a lack of concrete evidence. Others believe that the media pressure and public opinion's focus exclusively on the McCanns diverted the authorities' attention from external clues. An even more surprising twist came with the revelation of phone records that were only investigated years later. These records showed a series of calls made and received by an unidentified number that, on the night of the disappearance, was active near the resort. What caught attention was the timing. These calls happened exactly when Kate McCann was reporting Madeleine's disappearance. But instead of acting on this information, the Portuguese authorities only investigated the records much later, when the clues were already practically cold. What did these calls mean? Were they part of a coordinated plan, or just coincidences that ended up aligning in a disturbing way? One of the most controversial theories, which emerged thanks to parallel investigations, involves the alleged use of another apartment in the same resort to hide Madeleine for a few hours before moving her out of the location. This hypothesis was raised after the analysis by specialized sniffer dogs, which indicated the presence of suspicious odors in an apartment that, officially, had not been used during that period. What makes this idea even more intriguing is that, according to some reports, the key to this apartment was registered in the name of a temporary resort employee. This employee, who disappeared shortly after the case gained international attention, was never located to give an official statement. Could this apartment have been used as an intermediary point before Madeleine was taken out of the resort? If so, why was this line of investigation abandoned so quickly? And as if all these twists weren't enough, the DNA analysis collected in Madeleine's room brought more doubts than answers. While some samples were attributed to family members, others contained traces that couldn't be immediately identified. For years, these traces were treated as irrelevant, but new forensic analysis technologies have brought to light the possibility of identifying connections that were previously impossible. This has rekindled the hope that perhaps it is still possible to connect these traces to a suspect or even to a clearer scenario of what happened that night. With so many inconsistencies and twists, it's hard not to ask, why didn't some of this information receive the attention it deserved initially? The answer may lie in the mix of media pressure, institutional failures, and even the technological limitations of the time. But beyond that, there is something deeply unsettling in how the case was handled from the start. Madeleine McCann was not just a missing child. She became the center of one of the greatest criminal mysteries of our era. And like any mystery, the truth sometimes gets lost amidst the chaos of assumptions. The Madeleine McCann case leaves us buried under layers of assumptions, mistakes, and a narrative that seemed destined to confuse. After 17 years, it's evident that some important pieces of this puzzle never received the attention they deserved, and the media's role in this cannot be ignored. The way certain elements were amplified while others were deliberately left aside continues to be one of the greatest contradictions of this case. My opinion? I have no doubt that the authorities' initial mistakes, combined with international pressure and the excessive focus on more sensational theories, diverted attention from crucial clues. This doesn't mean that answers can't emerge in the future, but with each passing year, the chances become more remote. It's like trying to rebuild a house with pieces from an incomplete puzzle. The important pieces might be lost, and without them, we're left with just assumptions. What disturbs me most is that, beyond institutional failures, there was a human disconnection in the search for Madeleine. People were quick to form theories and point fingers, but slow to look at the details that could truly make a difference. The story is not just about a missing girl, but about how our system can fail in irreparable ways when we don't act with precision and responsibility from the start. However, one of the biggest questions remains unanswered. How exactly did the media's role influence the investigations, and what is still being hidden after all these years? You won't want to miss the analysis we're preparing on the most controversial editorial decisions surrounding this case and how they may have irreversibly shaped public perception. If you've made it this far, I want to hear your opinion. Which detail or theory do you believe was most overlooked by the media? Leave in the comments the phrase, "I am a guardian of the mystery," so I know you watched the video until the end. Don't forget to share your ideas because every point of view can help illuminate the darkest corners of this case. Now subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next video, where we'll continue this journey through mysteries, hidden truths, and stories that challenge our understanding. And if you want to delve even deeper into the analysis of the media's choices in the Madeleine McCann case, click on the next video appearing on the screen. There, we'll reveal the most shocking behind the scenes of this mystery.